Are you ready for more View component features? We're slowly getting to an end of this module though, promised. And you already know a lot of the core features you gotta know. But here's another nice feature which sometimes can be very nice to have. Let me stick to this Manage Goals component, even though it's not super beautiful. And let's say here we have a button where I have a text of set goal. And when this button is clicked, I wanna save my goal. So for that, I'm going to add a script here in Manage Goals and add a method. And I'll keep it very simple here. I'll name this method set goal. And in here, I then want to check what's inside of the input. And if it's empty, I want to show an error message to the user. If it's a valid goal, we'll not do anything here because I want to focus on that error part and on the error message. So here we point at set goal. And inside of set goal, we can get our entered value with help of refs, for example, or with vModel and two-way binding. But here I'll bring back that ref concept, add my ref key to the input element, and give it an identifier of my choice, in this case goal. And then here with $refs.goal, we can get access to this input element, and therefore with .value, we can get the value the user entered. And now if entered value is an empty string, let's say, then I want to show an error. Now here in the browser, we can use the alert function for that. Input must not be empty. That's a message we could output here, and the alert function is available in the browser like that. So if we now save that and go back, here in Manage Goals, we now have a button. And if I enter nothing here and I press set goal, I get my alert here. This works, but in most applications, you probably don't want to show an alert like this. This built-in alert is not really nice to look at. It probably doesn't fit the styling of the rest of your application. And therefore, this is maybe not what you want to do. Instead, maybe you want to build your own alert, your own modal. So your own overlay dialog, which you want to show. And that's exactly what I'll do here. I'll build my error alert.view component here. And that will be a very simple component which uses the built-in dialog element, which is a default HTML element, to output some content. And actually here, we could use some slot content to be flexible regarding what's shown in that dialog. Now I will add some scoped styling here real quick, targeting this dialog, giving it a position of fixed top 20 VH to move it 20% down from the top of your window, left 30% here, whoops, like this, and give it a width of, let's say, 40%, so that we have a centered dialog here in the end. And give it a background color of white and a box shadow to have a light drop shadow here in the end. But that's just some basic styling. I'll also add a padding of 1 rem, and that's it for now. You can definitely style this in a more beautiful way, but that should do the trick for now. So now we have this dialog where the exact content inside of it is flexible, thanks to our slot here. So now in Manage Goals, I want to show that dialog if the user entered something invalid. How could we do that? Well, we could use vIf for that. We could manage some data here in our Manage Goals component and have an input is invalid data property, which initially is false, because initially the input is not invalid. After all, the user hasn't entered anything yet. But we'll set this to true here if we see that what the user entered is invalid. So we can then set this input is invalid to true. And now we want to show our error alert here if input is invalid is true. So for that, here in this template, we could simply add error alert, this component. And in order to use it here, of course, here we should import error alert from ./error_alert.view, not ./components, but just ./error_alert.view, because it's in the same folder as manage goals, which is where I'm adding this import. And then we can register this as a local component here. It's the first time we're registering a local component outside of app.view, but as I mentioned earlier, this is absolutely possible. So error alert is now a local component here in manage goals. And now I only want to output error alert if, with vif, if input is invalid is true. And then in here we could have a title, for example, input is invalid, and a paragraph where we provide more information. Please enter at least a few characters. Anything like that. This here is the markup that will be provided for the slot in error alert. So with that, we should hopefully show an error alert if the user enters something invalid. So if the user enters nothing. Then, thanks to this data property and vif, we show this error alert. Let's give it a try. Let's save that, reload, go to manage goals, and enter nothing. Click set goal, and we see nothing. That's my bad though. The built-in dialog element needs an open attribute to be displayed. Therefore, we could of course also display the visibility of this dialog by toggling the open attribute, but I will always add open and instead just show or hide it by adding or removing the entire component to the DOM with vif. But make sure you have that open attribute on the dialog, otherwise it won't work. And with that, if I reload and try to submit an empty goal, and this is our error dialog. Now it looks like the styling was messed up a bit, and we can fix that by adding a margin of 0 here. If we do that, we should have that centered dialog. But it's not so much about the styling anyways. I mean, that can still be improved. But we see that we can now open our custom overlay like this. And of course, we could tweak it in more detail, but this is already a useful pattern to be aware of. We can also make it closable now by going to manage goals, where we do pass our markup to this component. And for example, there we could add a button, OK, which we can press to handle this error. And upon a click on this button here inside of manage goals, we can trigger another method, confirm error could be the name, where we simply set input is invalid back to false to give the user another chance. So confirm error is now triggered upon a click on this button. This is also showing you, as a side note, why the concept of slots is so powerful. We can add the content for a totally different component in the component where we have all the logic for showing the error alert component. So we don't need to pass data around with custom events which the error alert emits here. Instead, we can handle everything here in the component where the error is generated, and yet hand off the styling and the markup of that dialog to a totally different component, which is a really nice way of splitting responsibility, if you want to look at it like that. But with that, if I now reload again, and I confirm an empty goal, we now also got the button to close this dialog. And that's very useful. But this again is nothing new. It's just a nice pattern to see, which is also not bad, but this is not showing any new feature. Well, we're going to dive into a new feature next, because our current implementation has a slight problem.